right, welcome. I'm Laura Slover. It's great to be here and see so many friends, and I'm going to get to meet some new people too. I'm also really excited to be on this panel with a whole bunch of friends and brilliant people. Oh, and we're being pictured. People are taking our picture. That's right. All right, everybody smile. Okay, picture up. All right, so it's great to be here. You all probably saw, but the title of this session, I'm going to read it to you, The Future of Testing and Assessment in a GenAI and SAT Optional World. Well, for those of you who have been watching the news, you know that the SAT is becoming increasingly less optional. And so we're going to really focus today on AI and assessment. And then because I've got such people here who are really focused on both the learning trajectory and assessment, we're going to talk about how assessment also bridges into learning and is part of learning. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then each of my panelists will introduce themselves. As I said, I'm Laura. I have just taken on a new role to lead the Carnegie Foundation and ETS joint endeavor to, and the Carnegie unit, measure durable skills both in and out of school and help provide meaningful pathways and economic opportunity for all kids through measuring better and in a fair and equitable way to help kids reach their goals. I could say much more about that, but I think things will become more clear in this conversation. So let's see. I want to just throw out the group a question, which is pretty open, which is how are each of you seeing AI in your space? How are you using it in your work? And what are you seeing and what lessons are that we can learn right off the bat? And I think we're going to start with Gavin. Please introduce yourself and tell people why you're here.
Thanks a lot. My name is Gavin Cooney. I'm the CEO and founder of Learnosity. I'm Irish, so I'll have to make a very conscious effort to speak slower and more clear for you all. So we're pretty big in the formative space. We have about 40 million users doing assessments. Last year we delivered over 18 billion questions online on screen. So we see GenAI, we see so many opportunities here. We're working on a bunch of things and have launched a bunch of stuff around GenAI. There's such a massive opportunity in education. I'm one of those people, I do not believe that the great opportunity here, the killer application, is an AI tutor. In fact, I think the opposite. I don't think that at all. But there are some great opportunities in here around formative assessment to give better feedback to students, to generate more content, to just to create much better learning products. So it's kind of interesting to look at the whole. This is a massive game changer. It's the biggest opportunity we've had in education in 100 years. And it's bigger than the internet. It's bigger than the iPhone, I think, in terms of what we can do here, and it changes a lot of things for all the players in the space. So we've been working on a bunch of things around essay scoring, generation of content, feedback in mathematics, maintaining the island bank health, doing chat experiences that are not tutor-based, but formative assessment where the AI is asking questions as well. So I think it's a massive opportunity in the space. And formative just got a lot better, but it got more challenging for summative, which I guess is what we're here to talk about.
Thanks. Sarah, go ahead.
So I'm Sara Estrada. I'm from Imagine Learning, and I work in our supplemental and intervention product space, both with developing products that support educators and students with assessment data and insights, as well as supporting our assessment research. And I really think, at Imagine Learning, we believe that assessment is in service of learning. And so we are really looking at ways that we can use AI and GenAI to identify opportunities to surface more valuable insights for learners and for teachers, and generally make more successful outcomes for students. So that's sort of where we're focused right now.
Thanks. Steve.
Steve Marietti, Chief Commercial Officer of Supplemental Education for Kaplan North America. Long history in our organization, obviously, of preparing for a variety of tests, including the SAT, which is the starting point of this. In terms of assessments and what we see going on, there are a lot of interesting things happening. We're doing a lot of those. They tend to be grouped into a couple of categories, and we're pursuing a lot of sort of different initiatives within those. Obviously, the first one everybody jumped to was the item piece, and you mentioned that, Gavin. That's sort of easy, and you see the language models are great at generative content. Of course, you do that, and then you sort of get to the adjuncts to learning. So the helper apps, the AI tree. Okay, we're doing a version of that, advising and pieces like that. I think the thing that we're all really trying to crack, and I hear it as a thread here, is how does it add to more personalized learning? And that I think is the next frontier that we haven't all perfectly nailed down, but there's a lot of excitement ahead for us. And I agree, there's probably not an area of our space that's not going to be transformed by AI.
Thanks. Auditi?
Hi, I'm Auditi Chakravarty. I'm the CEO of ERDIF. That's the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund. And previous to ERDIF, I spent many years at College Board, so I have a lot of experience in coming at this question from an assessment perspective. At ERDIF, as an R&D organization, our singular purpose across the 3 programs that are part of our portfolio is transforming student learning. So we have measurement and AI being used across all of our programs, but it is all in service of strengthening student learning. And where we see where I see some really interesting opportunity in what we're doing is that we have much better ability now to capture a lot of data that we don't usually think about capturing, and capturing data around what students are thinking differently when we start to marry different ways, different technologies for capturing data and put that together with the power of AI. So, for instance, one of our programs in EF plus Math are QThink students who are using the QThink platform. Ryan Baker worked with that team to build ways to measure just through students' engagement with the tool, how they're self-regulating their learning. And so with that data of how they're self-regulating their learning, we're able to then adapt the learning experience and the platform to them. So that's an example of, that's assessment that's happening, but very, very, very embedded within the tool itself, and we're using AI. And that's the kind of AI we've been using for a long time, traditional machine learning. But now there's starting to be we're starting to do some research around what are some of the things that we can do with LLMs that have historically been done with machine learning. So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities there as well.
Thanks. Sara. We have 2 Saras
Yeah.
in our panel.
Hi, I'm Sara Vispoel. I'm the Chief Assessment and Learning Officer at Finetune, which is a Prometric company. And my background is I was a teacher, and I didn't really love standardized tests. I didn't like the state tests that were coming through. I'm like, I'm a teacher, I know my kids, and these tests don't seem to line up. So I went back and got my PhD in measurement and statistics and worked at ACT. So I have for about 17 years, making sure these items are as good as they can be. But now at Finetune, we have quite a few opportunities. Much like others on the panel, we're really paying attention to that measurement perspective. So we have a team of measurement scientists, and we have a team of AI scientists. So we work together to make our products be extremely refined on how the kind of inferences that they're making. And one of the things we haven't really talked about that I wanted to mention that we're doing is, in addition to generative AI and coming up with ways of writing questions better, we also have taken on the important topic of aligning materials. In order for adaptive to work, or in order to make sure that kids get the right stuff, that has to be tagged correctly, right? It has to be aligned. And so one of the cool things, applications with AI and alignment, is that you can train AI to do that. I don't know how many of you have ever tagged items and loved it. I love tagging. It takes a long time, and no matter what result you get from people, you'd never get that same result again if you tagged again. So in this world where we're worried about content, there's so much content, there's so much personalized learning. In order to get it to the right place, it's cool to use AI to use that alignment tool, and we can use the AI to get a rationale that points at evidence for each one of those inferences. So that's one of the more exciting things I've seen with AI and the cycle of learning.
Thanks, you guys. That was great. So a lot is happening with each of you. I would love for you to each talk about, you've introduced yourself, you've introduced your work. What do you think, looking forward, are like the most radical opportunities with AI and assessment as you think about how to bridge the learning cycle? Sara, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think you know, for a long time, we've had a goal in assessment of making assessment more authentic, you know, moving away from the multiple choice question, the controlled environment, to closer towards, you know, what Socrates might have thought of as assessment, the actual teacher interacting with the student. And so I think GenAI and other, you know, other types of these models really hold the promise to allow us to develop more innovative approaches to assessment, and most importantly, to scale them to a level where we can actually deliver them and impact students at, you know, large scale, which has previously went out of reach, really.
Awesome. All right, who am I going to next? Auditi.
Okay. So I don't know how radical this is, because I think that people are doing it. I think some of these things are all radical if they get adopted en masse, right? So I think that's where I come from as I think about this question. So I'll draw the distinction. We're talking about, we started talking about AI, but there's generative AI, there's large language models, and then there's machine learning, natural language processing, and we're kind of blending all of these things, but they're useful for different things. And I would hold that, you know, LLMs are great for content creation. They're not great for being right. And so you use them for certain things where content creation helps you. So LLMs are allowing us to generate so many more items, if that's what you need for that form of assessment you're doing. It just allows us to generate much more. I think the interesting idea is when you start to put those things together, when you have the ability to have much, much more content, to be able to deliver more culturally relevant items to students, because you can have item pools that have much more of a variation of kinds of contexts that are represented. But then the other thing is to be able to really put that in the context of what machine learning allows us to do around personalization. So if I, think about it in the context of some of the work that we're doing, I'm really excited, and I think where things can get radical. Radical in an assessment world sounds radical in and of itself.
I'm with you.
Where I think things can start to get radical is if we can really start to not only measure and understand what students know and are able to do, and as I also said earlier, start to understand what students are thinking, but also what are the contexts and what are the environmental and other contexts in which students are learning and being assessed. And so, our Assessment for Good program is doing a lot of research into the various factors that help determine a student's state of well-being, because we recognize that doesn't all come from the student. A lot of those have to do with environmental factors. What are their peer-teacher interactions in different in the classrooms that they're in? So when we start to really think about all of the dimensions and break those dimensions down, now you can start to adapt learning according not only to what the students shown that their skills and knowledge are, but what is the interplay, the relationship between them and a context, and let's say a classroom where they don't feel as strong a sense of belonging, and we're able to understand by digging into the data, well, that's because the materials aren't culturally relevant in this classroom, which might be one explanation, but a different explanation may be teacher or peer effects that are happening in that classroom. And so that's when you start to really be able to deal with the host of data. I think that's what's really ultimately the exciting thing about AI, right? Like, there's just so much data technology allows us to capture much more of that data, and if we use the different forms of AI responsibly and responsibly understanding the impact that they have, we get a chance to really dig much more deeply into the factors that drive student learning and really help to optimize for student learning.
Yeah, so I was third. I'm supposed to have my little
Hard to
points.
follow that
There
one,
we go. Well, I think I can take a slightly different approach. I think there is a radical opportunity for AI, and especially with respect to poor quality. And if we're not paying attention to that, large language models are great at some things. But I was speaking with someone today, they're like, you can't just put lipstick on an LLM and call it a teacher, right? There are some LLMs on their own. They can produce some things, but when they talk about the assessment best practice, or really driving why are you posing these particular questions, or why are you writing this particular content? Teachers know about this. It's not about telling. Teaching isn't telling. Learning is putting that student in the right place and then posing the right question, right? So when we talk about AI, like all AI is not the same, we want to make sure and think about, again, when you see a product, you might think, well, now what is driving the content that's coming out of it? Do you have a customized AI that knows about best practice, that knows about what constructs you're measuring, things like cognitive complexity and things like that, that are, again, knowing how to phrase those items or phrase that particular curriculum is really important. So that's one of the things that I think we have to watch out for radical changes for AI or opportunities. Watch that quality.
Anyone else want to add radical opportunities before I go to the Eeyores in the group to talk about the risks?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to be an extension of a lot of what's already been said. But I think the opportunities, you talked about data, we talked about that, the integrated component, Sarah, you mentioned that. I think there is so much we can do as we think about AI, as an assessment vehicle that's threaded throughout all of instruction, and beginning to evaluate beyond just the knowledge component that sort of right now summative tests do a lot of, right? So mostly they're there to evaluate whether you know things. Well, let's be real. In an AI-powered world, if we're looking forward, one of the things AI is going to change is just how important it is to know that information. Already AI models can do a lot of the knowledge work that previously we were trying to assess for. So what we really have to start using assessment tools to understand is how good are students at processing that information? How good are they at using it? What kinds of traits as they work through this? Didi mentioned the word context. Broadly, contextually, how are they engaging and what insights does that give us about where they need remediation or what the future holds? I don't think that's a replacement for summative exams, high-stakes summative exams. And that I think we're seeing, you started, Laura, with the comment that schools are moving back to, in some cases, to using the SAT or other summative tools, high-stakes tools. There's a value to those. It's those and all the other ways we can use assessment, simulations, engaging in real-world scenarios. AI opens the door for all of that. The question is how we're going to use it and take that information and allow individuals, learners, to power the future of their lives.
Okay, I want to push on that a little bit. The Skills for the Future work that I mentioned, the combination of Carnegie and ETS, is working specifically to go deep on how to capture skill development and build the evidence of student development of skills over time. Not one and done, but over time. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'll invite anybody else to talk about that before we get to the risks, which there are. But talk a little bit more about how to capture skill development and what that might look like, not just in a single moment, but through multiple bites at the apple.
Yeah, I think there are probably as many ways to talk about that as there are opportunities in learning. Because, and again, I'm sort of keying on something you mentioned, but AI opens the door to evaluate and assess at almost every stage of learning. So your ability to capture information and data becomes near infinite, and your ability to process that and take action on it is enormous. I think we shouldn't stop there. An area that we've been pursuing pretty actively at Kaplan is the world of simulation, real-world engagement with content. If you can show that you can do something, is that as valuable as, or even more valuable than knowing just the underlying information around it? So there are both ways that we can embed it and also modes that allow us to constantly be evaluating and assessing people.
Thanks.
There's no doubt here that there's a radical change in how we do continuous assessment. It's a radical change in how we can do more authentic assessment. You can put tools in the hands of teachers and professors. They can assign more audio, more video, more essays, and have a kind of a much more manageable life where they don't have to grade these things and so on. But there's some problems, right? And so it's a huge shift. Informative, absolutely, really, really exciting. But ironically, going back to the title of the session, it starts to pose some real problems in summative assessments. So I would have been here a year ago, 2 years ago, absolutely talking about how we should do more continuous assessment, how we should do more project work, how we should do more essays, how we should, all that kind of stuff. But now you have to assume that every student is cheating. You have to assume that every student has access to GenAI to do that, right? Nearly every question that they're being asked, they can copy and paste into ChatGPT and they can get the answer to. and they can generate these really kind of credible essays, and there is no technology that can detect that. So there are people out there selling stuff, I'm not going to name any names, but it doesn't work, and if it did, it won't work in 6 months' time when the next version of GPT or something else will come out. So you have to assume that somebody has been using GPT or something similar. And it's not just GPT. I'll give you another example. I was helping a friend of mine do his PhD recently, and I was able to literally put his whole lit review into an AI and have it critiqued by the AI. Now, he'd done the research and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't cheating so much, maybe. But it's, that's AI doing a bunch of work for him. And what that means is you're kind of with a summative assessment, dare I say it, if you want it to be equitable, you want to be fair using the mechanisms we have today, you're kind of back to a closed exam hall with a pencil, where you, or maybe an online exam that's been supervised in some way. Because you have to assume that anything else, anything less than that, is going to be using GenAI, and people are going to be cheating. So it really kind of throws the cat among the pigeons when it comes to kind of real, authentic assessment. So it's pretty interesting.
The cat among the pigeons.
Yeah.
I like that.
Is that not an Americanism?
That is not an American term. It's like the fox in the hen house.
Yeah, okay.
The cat
Sorry.
and the pigeons. Okay,
Put
I like that.
The fox and the pigeons. Right, okay.
Oh my
The cat in the hen house. Okay, got it.
I think that's really true, Gavin, when you think about today's summative assessments. But the question is, what should summative assessments look like in a post-Gen AI world? Because in the workforce, in college, students will be using Gen AI, and how can we measure whether you are a successful learner, given that Gen AI is available? And I don't think we're there yet. So yes, we do have to be concerned about how those tests and the results of those tests are used today. But I think there is a future further down the road where that is less of a concern.
And look, every major advance here, the calculator, we all worried that people would, by the way, before I was around, right? I'm not that old, but before, we were worried about how people would learn arithmetic. Graphing calculators, we were worried about that, worried about encyclopedias before that. There's always going to be somebody saying this, and I'm not the guy to say that, but right now, the current summative doesn't really work. So if you're assuming that somebody is going to cheat in some of these things, it's kind of like, well, I always thought I really like to know how good Lance Armstrong really was. So let's have the Tour de France where they're all on steroids. And we'll see how good they are. So can we create assessments where everybody's using AI, everybody's using Gen AI? Let's have the Olympics where they're all using drugs. And wouldn't that be fun?
That's going to be the tagline of this panel. Everybody use drugs.
Absolutely. Not
Thank
France
you very much.
24, it's gonna be,
Mic drop.
Dublin 25, we're going to have the Drugs Olympics. But if you think about it, you look, all the record breakers in these races, and they use drugs. Wouldn't it be wonderful to find out who was actually the best runner or the best cyclist?
Yeah, so-
But likewise, with someone of here, if you're going to cheat, do we just let
I'm going
it
to
be?
translate that into the student world, where
Yeah.
I think the analogous thing would be let's actually not have all kids take drugs, but have them show their best, whatever it takes. And so you could think about the AI as being able to cull through a lot of their performances and raise up the best ones.
And doesn't matter, right? So if you're
does it matter?
teaching coding, doesn't matter if you're GitHub Copilot will help you write every second line of code that you're writing right now. So if I'm hiring developers, and I got a ton of them, I have 100 or more developers working for me, do I want them using Git? Am I taking some moral stance that they shouldn't write their code with GitHub? No, I'm not. I gave them licenses to GitHub Copilot, and I want them to create more code and better code using this tool. So in the future, when you're hiring developers, you want them to be very good at using this stuff. And does it matter if in an exam for coding that they use the Copilot? No, it doesn't. They need to learn the fundamentals and learn how to use those tools. And there's an analogy in most professions and most exams.
I just want to jump in one thing, though, and because I want to say something you said. Just because they're using AI doesn't mean that it's going to be better code because you're using it. So that's the other opportunity, right? I mean, LLMs have a way of there's a regression to the mean that happens there. And so if I'm a really good developer, should I be using an LLM to develop my code, or might there be a different task that actually allows me to up-level my code? So I think there's an opportunity there to, again, think about what is it good for, what is the quality, and then reframe the task around that. What do we really want learners to be able to do? So if we want them to be able to, if we know that you're going to end up using an LLM to, write your dissertation, I guess is what your friend did, use an LLM, then what's the task that we give them? And maybe that's what the projects start to look like, rather than assuming that if they use the LLM, that's necessarily, that's it, that's the answer, and they're going to end up having better performance coming out of that.
I think that's right. I think that's your calculator example, right? Like math didn't go away.
Yeah.
The prompts and the expectation got harder. So I don't know how that ties into the drug example on the bikes, but
If you give everybody a calculator and a math exam, that's exactly it. That's what I'm trying to say.
you could, but your expectation on that test changes.
Exactly.
Right, and the prompts and the tasks that you want them to do change. And so if you acknowledge that in the future, every student, Auditi, what you said, like what you want them to know how to do is use AI because it's not going away. So we're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. Mm-hmm. Is it a totally different way of thinking of prompts? Not even just getting harder, but how can you, how are you dealing with the response that that AI generates, and how do you approach that, and how do you use it? That gets to the skill component. The skill of using AI is actually the future task that we want everybody to accomplish, right? It's not just again, do you know the content? That's what we want to evaluate.
Sarah.
Yeah, so just a few things about when we're talking about summative, informative, and all this kind of stuff. We have to remember some assessment happens for a decision. You're trying to do it for a reason. Are you sorting people? Are you trying to select people? Are you trying to diagnose people and what they need? Are you trying to upskill them? So it depends on what you're using this particular thing for. One thing about standardized tests, I know I hated them. I'm like, I don't like them. They're standardized, meaning standardized conditions. It's like a controlled experiment, right? And so whatever we decide, all students should have access to these particular things and given under standardized conditions. That's all standardized assessment is. So however we choose to use the tools, whether it's calculators or I remember that I'm old, World Wide Web came out and people were like, oh my gosh, how are we going to teach with that, right? So it's how do we get the conditions, how do we structure assessments to get the decisions that we want, and how do we want to use GenAI to support those?
And I just want Auditi to help us for a second think about standardized assessments in standardized conditions and also contextual information specific to individual students that is really thinking about their health and well-being. How do you balance those?
I mean, I think it goes back to the overall system and what role each of these plays in there. And I think we, for a lot of reasons, assessment, when it is something that either people don't like or it takes a lot of time, we kind of say, all right, let's compartmentalize it, and then let's make it serve multiple purposes. And so we have standardized assessments that are being used for learning, for supportive learning, which maybe isn't what they're designed for or best for. So I think one of the opportunities that AI gives us in the ways that we've been talking about in supportive learning is to actually separate those things, because there's so much more data available about student learning all in so many other rich ways in their day-to-day interactions with their learning apps, with their in their classrooms, potentially observational. There are all kinds of things that you can then capture that now that becomes the way you support their learning. And so to your point, there are purposes for which the standardized assessment matters, and you can just say, and that's what it's for, and let's make that as efficient and time-bound as efficient as it can be, and let's actually say that those are different things for different purposes.
Okay, I'm doing a time check. We're going to have time for about 2 or 3 questions, so think about an interesting question. Not yet, just wait. I want to think about, okay, so one of the things that I'm very interested in is how to capture the development of skills, not just in school, but out of school. And you guys are experts, and you've been thinking about this a lot from the standpoint of how do you glean that information from within school learning. I'd love to have off-the-cuff thoughts about what do you do when kids are not in school? They're in jobs, they're in apprenticeships, they're on a team, they are taking care of family members. Are there things that can be standardized so we know that they're rigorous and valid, but at the same time are adaptive to individual contexts and circumstances?
Yes.
Yep, that's the answer.
Done.
I think I'll jump in on this, and then others, maybe it'll be sort of a group commentary. I think there are tons of opportunities for this. I think the question of making them standardized and valid, that's going to take time, and we're going to have to sort of understand the way in which the data comes in. But the students of today they live in a digital, always-on world. So their expectation is everything they're doing is evaluated and tracked from TikTok swipes to whatever. So finding that data and unifying it will be the difficult piece, and then actually validating and understanding what influences what you want to bring in. But it is possible, and so therefore, if it's possible, we're going to find a way to absorb that.
Sarah.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you were able to attend, but there's a great session this morning on P8 assessment. And one of the takeaways I took from that session was really a point around intentionality. That we have a new tool in our toolbox, and we have to really think about how to intentionally use that tool for assessment. And so there were discussions in that session ranging from, what's the type of data you're training your models on, to, how do you conceptualize the question and the validity question behind the assessment. What's the intended purpose? And so I think that's really what we need is we need a new way of thinking about how this tool, this measurement tool, plays into our overall questions about assessment. And I think that can help us understand how best to measure those skills you're talking about across a variety of contexts, educational contexts, workforce, and even beyond our traditional spheres where we think about measuring people like education and work to even things like the home. Yeah.
And we don't have enough data on this yet because this is a new tool. So we can do some really interesting things around assessment and authentic assessment and in workplace assessment, that kind of stuff. But there hasn't been any research how this works in a post kind of GenAI world because we're in it, a year? So nobody has finised their PhD on this yet.
Your friend.
And they will use AI.
Yeah,
they'll
they'll
use AI
use
too.
AI.
It'll be done probably in a couple days, right?
Yeah, exactly. If I
audience.
help, it will be about a weekend. But it's funny, I have to go back and help this guy with his thesis for the next few weekends. But he did the research, but it's another example. He did the research for years, helping to write it up. Doesn't really matter, does it? Does it?
You have to be able to express your learnings and your thoughts.
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, as someone who did a thesis,
Yeah.
part of me is yes, that's one of the most important part of the.
I'm probably the only person here
exercise.
without a PhD.
I was going to say, Gavin's here done several. So.
I just wonder how he'll do in that when he defends his dissertation. That'll be really curious.
Oh, yes. All right, ready? 3 questions. You, sir, in the glasses. Do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, can we run a mic?
Thank you. I'm Ezekiel Dixon-Roman from Teachers College, Columbia University. So my question is really around the fact that we are at least 40, 50 years in the cultural/linguistic turn of learning and development. Even an understanding of that culture and social systems are complex and dynamic. And as we're having this conversation around standardized tests, which I think are more than conditions, really has a lot to do with the psychometric properties of the assessment itself that maintain standardization. Standardization is always about these static fixes in time and not about getting at the dynamic nature of learning and development, the situatedness of learning and development. The one example that I do think about that comes to mind that I think is it's more in the spirit of this is what Bob Mislevy had worked on with the AP art exam, using the portfolios and using those portfolios as items, if you will, and actually estimating at the end of the exam, at the end of the course itself, what might be understood as a summative measure of performance. This example is much more situated in the pedagogical context, much more responsive to the learning and development, and could even be understood as more in tune to culturally responsive approaches, or at least could be. And so I'm curious about, as we're having this conversation about standardized assessments and even summative assessments, is it standardization that we need? Because standardization is actually counter to the very interest that we understand of complex and dynamic systems.
Thank you. I think we're up here nodding. Like, yes, we're not just talking about a one and done assessment. We're talking about a gathering of information over time that reflects a learner and their path. And you didn't use the word asset-based, but we've done a lot of thinking about asset-based, where you're showing what kids can do, not what they can't do. And you made the point about multimodal too, which I think we all think is important. We don't have time for everybody to respond.
Yeah.
So Auditi, if you have one sentence, please go ahead.
That's
Put
me on the spot. How about one word? How about yes? No, I mean, I think that this whole, it all goes back to what is the purpose for standardization. So we're using standardization here as a stand-in for the, high stakes nature of decisions. But I think, AP Studio Art is a great example of the ability to marry standardization because there is a spine of we've defined what is it that we want students to know and be able to do, but we give students a lot of agency, creative agency, expressive agency. It might be, students putting together a portfolio of their work. They get a chance to pick and choose what's their best work. So there are a lot of different ways you can imagine marrying those things that I think still certainly allow for standardization that are much more about student performance. So I don't think we disagree at all with that, although maybe Gavin disagreed with that because you think that the students are all cheating
drugs.
when they do those
It'd be
things.
drugs
which
and
I
cheating.
think is
Gavin thinks they're all cheating.
I'm inherently a cheater here.
I'd love to talk to you more after, so stick around. All right, we don't really have time for, okay. I know Kara had a question, and then we'll end with you.
Mine might be quick.
My colleague, Kara.
Lovely conversation. Love the panel. You're all brilliant. My question is around us thinking about kind of data outside of the classroom, extant data, bringing it in. We talk a lot about opportunity to learn outside of the classroom, but when we talk about opportunity to learn, the same is true for opportunity to assess. So if we're thinking about kind of, if my kids play t-ball, I assess so many skills while they're playing t-ball, but there are many children who don't have the opportunity to play. Yeah. So I'd love the panel's thoughts on how we afford opportunity to assess outside of the classroom, like we think about opportunity to learn.
Steve.
All right, I'll try. I think that as the, there's so much behind that question in terms of the way we can do it. There are established rubrics, obviously, for how we can evaluate all of those pieces. I think the question that was asked earlier is, to what extent are those, do those get collated and evaluated sort of against, something that is broader, and what indications does that give us? I think that we're just at too early a stage for that. But I think the next 2-5 years is going to show us the path for how we evaluate those things. Look, they already exist inside of so many professions, right? We're talking about OSCEs in medicine and sort of other pieces that exist. There's no reason that can't be extended to almost every field, including all of the professional components. And so I think we're on it. T-ball may be sort of one corner of it, but if it can escalate up to being a physician, it can be applied in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, I think the medical field has a lot of examples, but Kara's going to figure it out way before 3 years. So, okay, last question, because then we'll get kicked out of here.
My name is David Greenberg. I'm with the National Association of Charter School Operators. I'm interested in, there was a question that was in the description around the impact on statewide assessments. And I'm interested what you're all thinking about, how AI and all these things are going to impact statewide assessments, because they're not going away, at least anytime real soon.
Well, there's a couple things. Again, there's some benefits that come with AI when we're talking about, again, when we specialize AI models, we can be very specific about the kind of learning objectives you want to make sure those questions are measuring, getting them at the right cognitive complexity level to get the kind of insights out of them when you're done, right? So statewide assessment is often used, again, in this standardized way because you want to compare. You're trying to compare people, and you don't want to have somebody have an easier experience than someone else. So all that equating and scaling and good stuff, that's where I think the statewide assessments are coming into play. But how generative AI and customized AI can help is, again, improving the quality and measurement qualities of those particular items. It'll get better and better. And again, there might be some other way, authentic assessments that we can do more with, different kinds of grading as well, right, to help with that. But it's important. We have to design them appropriately.
I heard inherent in your question a slightly different question. And Sara answered one part of the question, which is AI can make the assessments much more reliable, valid, maybe even exciting and engaging and feel more authentic. But is that your question? I think your question was, what's the future of the world of summative assessment, and does this allow us to shift our policy around them? So I think we'll end the session right there. And we'll come back to that next year. Thank you for the question. And please thank my awesome panel for their participation.